On a cold December night in Texas, a bright object dropped low over the road and hovered above a car, turning the pavement into a sheet of white light. What Cash and Landrum said happened next would leave a trail of fear, pain, and unanswered questions that still lingers decades later. The place was the piney edge of southeast Texas, where dark roads cut through open country and the sky feels unusually close. In that setting, any strange light can seem both impossible and alarmingly near. This was December 1980, near Huffman, not far from Houston, when the Cold War era still trained people to look up with suspicion. A mystery in the sky could be read as technology, weather, or something far harder to name. The people at the center were Betty Cash, Vickie Landrum, and young Colby Landrum, returning home after an evening drive. They were not searching for a mystery. They said the mystery found them on an otherwise ordinary road. According to their account, a brilliant diamond-shaped object appeared ahead, then settled above the roadway with a heat unlike anything they had felt before. The light was so intense that it seemed to wash out the world around it. They said the object had a harsh, almost industrial presence, as if the air itself were being pressed downward. In that moment, the road, the trees, and the car seemed trapped beneath a silent machine in the sky. Then came the detail that made the case endure. A convoy of helicopters, or something that looked like them, surrounded the luminous object. Witnesses claimed the sky had become crowded with machines, as if one event had suddenly grown into many. For the women in the car, the sight was not abstract at all. They said the heat grew so strong that Betty Cash later reached for the car door and felt the metal burn against her hand. That physical reaction matters because it moves the story from a strange light to a claimed injury. The case is remembered not only for what was seen, but for what was said to have been left behind in the body. In the days that followed, Betty Cash reportedly became seriously ill, with burns, weakness, and symptoms that demanded medical attention. Vickie Landrum and Colby also said they felt effects after the encounter, though Betty's condition became the most alarming. This is where the case deepens, because the injuries were described as unusual and persistent. Supporters argue that the pattern of symptoms sounded less like a brief roadside scare and more like exposure to something intense and unfamiliar. Investigators later gathered statements, and the women's accounts stayed broadly consistent on the central points: the light, the heat, the helicopters, and the sudden physical distress. Consistency alone does not solve the case, but it keeps the story from fading into rumor. The location also matters because southeast Texas sits near military airspace, busy flight routes, and a landscape where night operations are not impossible. That makes the helicopter element both intriguing and difficult to sort from memory under stress. If helicopters were present, what were they doing around a blazing object over a public road? If they were not, why did multiple witnesses describe them so clearly in the middle of a terrifying encounter? That question sits at the center of the mystery because the case has always lived in the space between observation and interpretation. A light in the sky can be one thing. A light, aircraft, and injury together become something much harder to place. As the story spread, the incident drew attention beyond local gossip and into the world of researchers, journalists, and military speculation. The more people examined it, the more it seemed to resist a tidy explanation. One reason it remains compelling is the timing. The event happened at night, over a road, with witnesses in motion and conditions that made every second count, leaving little room for calm analysis in the moment. Another reason is the intensity of the reported light and heat. People can misread distance, but they do not easily forget the sensation of a vehicle warming, a hand burning, and a sky that feels too close to touch. A third detail is the aftermath, which gave the case its human weight. Betty Cash's reported illness turned the encounter from an eerie roadside sighting into a personal crisis with medical and emotional consequences. That aftermath is why the story never settled into a simple campfire tale. When a witness says the sky left a mark on her body, the mystery stops being about curiosity alone and becomes about accountability. Believers in the extraordinary reading point to the combination of craft, helicopters, and injury as a rare convergence. They see a case where the sky behaved like a controlled machine, not a random light or a distant star. They also note that the witnesses were not describing a vague flash. They described structure, motion, and a sequence of events that unfolded close enough to feel personal, immediate, and frighteningly real. Still, the alternative readings deserve serious space. Night misperception, stress, and the difficulty of judging size and distance can reshape a sighting, especially when bright lights and moving aircraft are involved. Skeptics also question the helicopter formation, suggesting that ordinary military activity near training routes may have been folded into a frightening memory of the event. In that view, the story becomes a collision of real aircraft, strong light, and human alarm. Medical explanations were examined too, including the possibility that the reported injuries came from another source or were complicated by pre-existing conditions. Yet the sequence of symptoms and the witness's insistence on the heat keep the case from closing neatly. What makes the incident hard to dismiss is not a single dramatic claim, but the way several difficult elements lock together: a bright object, apparent helicopters, roadside heat, and lasting illness form a pattern that still feels unresolved. Even now, the case invites a careful kind of wonder. If the women saw a military event, why did it seem so unlike anything they could identify? And if it was something stranger, why has the record never fully settled the matter? The unanswered questions are practical as much as dramatic. What exactly was overhead? How close was it? And what produced the reported heat intense enough to matter to the people inside the car? There is also the problem of distance between memory and evidence. The event was lived in seconds, then reconstructed over years, and the surviving record depends on testimony, investigation, and interpretation that do not always line up perfectly. That tension is part of why the Cash-Landrum case still holds attention. It is not simply a tale of lights in the sky. It is a story about witnesses who believed something extraordinary had pressed itself into their ordinary lives. And when a case reaches that point, the question changes. It is no longer only what people saw, but what kind of event can leave such a strong impression on both memory and body. The conventional explanations remain important, and they may account for part of what happened. But they do not erase the unease of the full account, especially where the reported light, aircraft, and injuries seem to